And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Drunvalo Melchizedek, founder of the Flower of Life workshops. He is a world traveler. He's given workshops, seminars, lectures on sacred geometry, human energy fields, spirituality, meditation, and living in the heart. His meditation with the angels and his work with the prana and energy healing has helped tens of thousands of people. First-time guest on Coast to Coast. Drunvalo, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, George.
Good to have you with us. You have quite a following, by the way.
Well, they're around the world, I guess.
You know, I've been looking at your work, maybe over the last 6 months to a year, but I have a dear friend in St. Louis. His name's Johnny Rose. He's been a buddy of mine for years, and he sent me an email a few weeks ago and said, George, we have that kind of relationship, right? So he says, George, when are you going to have Drunvalo Melchizedek on the show? And I went, John, I guess we'll get to work on that. And here you are. So tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I spent about 14 years studying a certain part of mathematics called sacred geometry, and with a focus of trying to understand the human body energy field. It took about 2.5 years, and I mean every single day, every night, and to just figure out the core, the center of the energy field. And then it took another 12 years to actually define it and mathematically clearly define it. And once that was done, then I was able to go very quickly to understand a lot of the ancient thoughts in Egypt and Sumeria and India and Tibet, a lot of the ideas that they had and a lot of the things that they were saying suddenly became very clear, became understandable.
You've got a heavy background in mathematics and physics. Were you able to use that for this?
Yeah, it helped.
Yeah.
Definitely. But sacred geometry is different than calculus or something like that. You don't need computers. You don't need measuring sticks. You don't need anything. All you need is a straight line, a compass, and a pen and pencil, and you can figure out the most detailed aspects of the entire reality, galaxies, anything. It's amazing how it works.
In your work, Serpent of Light, Beyond 2012, you talk about this movement which cuts across like a snake. Tell me about this energy force.
Well, the human body, and this is one of the things I discovered when I finally was able to see the human energy field, which is about 60 feet in diameter around every person on Earth. What we discovered was that the same very complex electromagnetic field that's around a human being is identical around the Earth. It's exactly the same thing.
Huh.
And the kinds of movements that we know of, like in Kundalini yoga or Kriya yoga,
right.
These kinds of things apply to the Earth also. It wasn't me who understood this first. Strangely enough, it was several indigenous tribes around the world that began to talk to me about this.
This energy force around an individual, does it change by the individual? I mean, if someone is sick, let's say, will that energy field be smaller than someone who's pretty healthy? Or if someone's positive as opposed to someone who's negative, would there be that change?
There are changes, yes. Not in exactly the way you're thinking. Deep emotional trauma. The primary core that's around the body is in the shape of what's called a star tetrahedron. It's two tetrahedrons that are interlocked to actually make a cube. And the upper one, the one that's facing to the sky, is male, and the one facing down to the bottom is female. And they represent all the polarities in your emotional body and in your body also. But they also represent the primary polarities, your mother and father. And so if you've had deep emotional trauma, say your dad beat you up when you were little or your mother did something to you, well, you can actually see this on the computer screens. It will reflect the upper tetrahedron, if it was your father, will constrict. It'll get smaller.
Huh.
And so you can clearly see where the emotional problems are, and the mental problems too, where the physical problems are all interrelated.
Interesting. Well, I thank God I was raised by two great folks who are still there.
It helps.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. Tell me, I'm going to also look at you tonight as not a psychic, but someone who picks up the pulse of this planet. These events that are occurring around us right now, I have never seen a time where more people seemed stressed, whacked out, doing bizarre things. Are you sensing that too?
Well, I'm in a different country every 3 weeks for 25 years.
Jeez.
And I get to talk to people all over the world. And believe me, the whole world is going through this. It's not the United States. It's everywhere. It's even in small indigenous tribes out in the middle of nowhere and jungles and everything else. They're feeling it too. Everybody is.
What's causing it?
Well, there's a lot of factors going on here, and I have been studying this. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I have been deeply studying this for at least 45 years.
That's an expert.
and there are three different levels that are interconnecting with each other. I would call it the human level.
Okay.
And on the human level, there's a whole array. You have the secret government that is controlling all the other governments and practically everything that's going on and most of the money. I think they have 86% of all the money in all the banks of the world. And their agenda is really different than anyone else. And then you have the governments themselves, and their agendas have to conform in a way to the secret government, but they also have their other agendas. And the militaries of these governments have covert reasonings of their own. It gets very complex. The corporations of the world have their own. I mean, the oil companies don't want to see alternative fuel, and the pharmaceutical companies don't want to see alternative ways of healing. And so all these mixtures of things that are going on in the human world are all at play against each other. And then on top of this, you have extraterrestrials that are here. And there's lots of them, a lot more than what most people know. The United States government told me that the maximum that they knew, this was 10 years ago maybe, was 58. But there's a lot more than that. I believe, from what I understand, about 250,000 cultures are here.
Cultures? These
are different areas of space and time and dimension that they come from. And these are the less evolved beings. The more evolved beings don't need spaceships to be able to be here or to know what's going on. They don't have to do that. And so this is a huge array. During the 80s, we had the Greys that were abducting everyone, and they abducted close to 5 million people. And the cattle mutilation, which was really high-level laser technology that there was only 5 surgeons on Earth that could do. And and behind them were the reptiles and all this stuff. And we've heard all this stuff before, many times before. They're gone now. The last time they did anything was about 4 or 5 years ago in Argentina. They did about another 150 cattle mutilations. And that's the last we've heard of them. I believe I know where they are and what they're doing, but who cares?
Wherever they are, why did they go?
They had to. They didn't have a choice. We are at war with them, human beings are, and we won. In fact, if you go back to Hermes out of Greece, 2,000 years ago,
all right,
he wrote a book called The Emerald Tablets. If you read in there, he talks about every time we come in the cycles of this period of time, the ETs from other areas try to take us over every time because it's our weak points. This is our point when we are, I'll explain this in a little bit, but it all has to do with the cycles of time. But we are at a place in the cycles of time where we are very weak, very vulnerable. And there are certain ET races that are not very evolved that are always trying to mess with us. And they always lose.
And they've got the ability to get here. How do they lose, though? How do we overpower them?
Well, the story goes that's written in there, and it's on the walls in Egypt. It talks about that there is this spaceship that is underneath the Sphinx, about a mile down, according to them. It's flat on top. It's round and flat on the top and the bottom. So it's like a coin. And according to them, every 13,000 years when we come to this place, which is tied to this date of December 21st, 2012,
Okay.
then somebody on Earth finds their way to that ship, and which has been put